Okay, well, welcome to Module 2. This is where we're going to take a closer look at your class schedule. Now, this is a pretty long and heavy or meaty module. So get a beverage, get a pad of paper, pen, pencil, whatever you like to write with, and we're going to go through this. And if at some point you just take a break, remember you can always just stop and come back at another time. So let's get started on looking at your schedule, okay? So I have 9 tips and tools to plan a daily preschool schedule. Now, what we're going to go over, as I said, it's very long, but you don't need to memorize it. Don't worry. There is an article on the website with all of this information on it, and I have a download for you that's in your teacher resource section that you can use as a guide for planning your schedule. So for now, let's just run through it, and then you can come back and start working on your schedule. So planning your schedule, it's super important, and there's more to it than just planning, circle time, activity time, snack times. We've talked about how you have to consider your transition times because they're going to happen every day, and they are part of your day and part of your preschoolers' days. And we need to balance it with passive and active activities. If we have kids just doing very active things in a row, they're going to get exhausted and you're going to have behavior problems. So we need to have a balance of something where it's really active. Maybe you're doing music and movement. Then the next activity is there in interest centers. Much like many times you have snack, and then after snack we go outside. Then when we come back in, it's something more passive. So on the right here, you'll see this is an example of a schedule I had in my classroom, which shows the children what's going to happen next. And it has welcome, and once they get to school, then they have activities that they do. Then we would have a quick circle time. Then it was interest center time. After that, we cleaned up. Then we did a quick music and movement time while the other children were finishing cleaning up. We would then wash our hands. That's a transition time. We would have some transition activities happening then. Then we would all have snack. Then we would go outside to play. Now you'll notice I didn't put get ready to go outside to play. That was all included in here. The transition of putting on jackets and boots in the wintertime. Then when we came back in, another transition. As the children are taking off their jackets, hanging up their jackets, we would have a story time, and then it was time to go home. This was our half-day schedule. So if you don't consider these transitions in your classroom, you know what's going to happen. It's probably already happening in your classroom, right? You're going to spend your days or the whole year just wondering why you're always running behind. Why is it that we only have 3 minutes when it's time to go outside? Why are the children not in the groove of school? Why are we having so many behavior problems? Many times it's because of the number of transitions and stops and starts that happen throughout your day. So let's look at these 9 tips. And again, there is an article where you can read through this on your own on the website, and I'll give you a link to that below. So tip number one of 9, the predictability of knowing what comes next helps your preschoolers feel secure. We talked about this earlier. It leads them to feeling comfortable, and then they're comfortable to engage and participate in activities throughout the day because they know when things are going to start and when they're going to stop. And they tell time differently than we do. They tell time by knowing what comes next. We are asked daily by our preschoolers, when is snack time? When are we going outside? Is it time to go outside yet? For some children, this preoccupation with this question, when is mommy coming? When is grandma picking me up? They're obsessed with that. It's because when they don't know that, when this is going to happen, it limits their ability to participate in activities because they're so worried about being forgotten or what time, when they're going to be able to go home. In a daily preschool schedule, a visual one like I showed you earlier can help them predict this, and it's going to reduce their separation anxiety. This is especially helpful. It's helpful all year to have a visual schedule, but it's especially helpful at the beginning of your school year. Separation anxiety, I don't have to tell you, I'm preaching to the choir here, right? It's a real thing. We spend more time hugging parents sometimes than we do children because of separation anxiety. It's a tough thing, and if they can see visually, oh, we're doing this, then mom's coming, it reduces that anxiety for your children. So they may see, oh, we're washing our hands now, so we're going to get ready to have snack. Or we always go outside after snack because they can see that in that visual schedule. Or when we come in, we read a story and then mommy comes, or then grandma picks me up. So this visual schedule will really help them. So I highly recommend that you create a visual schedule. Now I do have one. It's not part of Preschool Cubby. It is in my store. on the website. And I'll put a link to that at the end of this entire training in case if you don't have a visual schedule, you can purchase that in my store. This should say number 2. Sorry about that. Number 2, you need to have a plan. We'll fix that. Another purpose for having a schedule is to help you to intentionally balance that active, passive types of activities that we talked about and teacher facilitated versus child-led activities. It helps them to keep the children from zoning out or getting bored or becoming overstimulated. So if you have too many active activities, they're just going to be exhausted. If you have too many things where they're just sitting and not moving very long, if you have a very long circle time, or if your children are going from circle time to then a story time, or a circle time to something that's just something that's very passive, they're going to get bored, and that's where your behavior problems come in. So your daily schedule is a fine balance of these things. So you're going to need to observe, assess, and make changes as needed throughout the year. A preschool schedule is not necessarily something that you post on the wall and it stays like that for the year or for years to come. Each group of your children are going to be different. One example, we had one winter where it must have snowed here twice a week, and the snow is not a bad thing. Let's get dressed, let's go out, let's go play in the snow. It was the bitter cold that came with it. We had days where the actual temperature was about 15 degrees, but with the wind chill, it was below 0. So we weren't going out for weeks and weeks and weeks. Yes, we had cabin fever. It was a huge issue. And we just realized when the children got there first thing in the morning, they're not going out at school because it's so cold. And of course, they're not going out when they're home because it's still too cold outside. So what we realized is they just need more movement in the day. So we provided that. What did we do? We stopped having arrival activities and circle time first thing in the morning. We set up some really active gross motor play. Now, we were very fortunate in this one program that we had a huge room. It was in a church, and we had the fellowship hall area. So we set up an indoor playground. We had ride-on bikes. We had just all kinds of things that they could do. And we did that for about 20 minutes when they first got there so they could burn off that energy. If you don't have a big space like that, then move your tables aside. Get out your parachute if you can use that in your classroom, or just have an obstacle course in your classroom, a hopping game. Do something where they can just burn off that energy. So my point is you may need to reassess it throughout the year. Set up your schedule so it's balanced, and then review it throughout the year and make those types of changes. So let's look at a sample portion of a preschool schedule for the morning portion of the day. This is what it might look like. From 9:15 to 9:30. So if your program opens at 9, from 9:15 to 9:30 might be your circle time. 9:30 to 10:30, you might have interest center time. From 10:30 for 20 minutes, you have snack time. From 10:50 to 11:20 is your outside play time. Then at 11:20, you might come in, have a story time, and then it's time to go home. And it looks great, right? But there's a problem with the schedule. We haven't allowed any time for cleanup time, any time for hand washing before snack, any time for putting on and taking off jackets. There's no time built into that. Let's look at that again. It's a pretty tight schedule. So inevitably, this is going to result in your time being shortened from 30 minutes, the outside time, from 30 minutes to 10 minutes, because you're not going to have time. For example, if right here with your outside time, you go from 10:50 and your outside time is from 10:50 to 11:20, if you don't plan in enough time for them to put on and take off jackets, you're not going to have your entire half hour outside. So what you might need to do is you might need to cut back on center time a little bit. I don't recommend that. I recommend having snack time and outside play time be one big period of time. And that way, if it takes more time for them to get ready and go out, that's okay. It's in your schedule. You're not going to be running late so that parents are there to pick up in the morning and your kids are still outside because you've lost track of your schedule. The truth is, whether you plan for transitions or not, they're part of your day. So if you plan on snack for being 15 minutes long, and it takes 8 to 10 minutes for all of your children to wash their hands, does that mean snack time's really only 5 minutes long? Right? Because you have 15 minutes, but you spent 10 minutes washing hands. Your children cannot possibly eat their snack in 5 minutes. Some can, they wolf it right down, right? But others cannot. It's not enough time for them to enjoy snack time. But what usually it means is that your activity after snack, which is usually outside time, ends up getting cut short because you're not planning the time into your schedule. And this has a ripple effect. Your children are going to be frustrated. If you're only able to stay outside for 10 minutes instead of 30, They're not getting the activity, that what we talked about, that running around and burning off their energy that they really, really need. And they're also not getting the amount of time it takes to really get involved in group play, because you're outside for 5 minutes and then coming back in. So they may just be deciding that they want to play tag, or they want to play dinosaur, or whatever they want to play outside, and now it's time to come in. They can't tell time, but they can feel it. They can feel that they just started to play and now it's all over. You will be running late for the rest of the day if you don't plan your transitions into your schedule. So for a half-day program, this means, usually it means shortened time outside, possibly cutting out story time. For full-day programs, it might mean eating lunch late or taking naps late, or and then you need to extend the time for the sleepers in your group, meaning your afternoon snack is going to be late. You're going to be late getting outside. It has this ripple effect for everything you do for the rest of the day. So the moral is, plan for transitions. They're going to happen whether you plan for them and put them on your schedule or not. So if you know it's going to take an extra 10 minutes for the kids to, wash their hands and go to the bathroom and get ready for snack, then don't make snack time 15 minutes long. Make sure you allow 25 minutes. Plan that in. It's a great learning time for them. So if you plan it in your schedule, your day will run a lot smoother. In addition, your children are going to feel a lot more confident that they know what's coming next and that they're going to have time to do what they want to do, because it's all just part of their day. So the third section is consider audio and visual cues for transitions. Now, you've read a few articles already on different ways to prepare your kids for a transition. Ideally, you want as few transitions as possible, right? And you want them to be as natural as possible. Like when we say, okay, it's time for snack, instead of feeling so frustrated, hurry up, you got to wash your hands, or we're not going to have enough time to go outside. Get rid of that stress. When we say it's time to get ready for snack, we know that it's time to clean up the toys, it's time to wash our hands and go to the bathroom and eat snack. We're talking probably 35, 40 minutes. That's all planned. Because it's planned in part of our day, there's no stress from any of us. So some audio cues, some things that will help them to hear. One of our classroom jobs was bell ringer. We had our director at the time, Miss Peggy, had this awesome metal bell that you could ring. The kids loved it. And we had classroom jobs that we would rotate every day for fun. The kids would just have different jobs every day. And bell ringer, oh my gosh, they loved this one. One of the teachers would give a 5-minute warning, and we wouldn't yell it across the classroom because that causes so much frustration for everyone. It's yelling and interrupting, and just slowly move throughout your classroom. And with each group, say, okay, in 5 minutes, we're going to clean up and get ready for snack. Go to the next group. Go over to the dramatic play area and insert yourself into dramatic play. If they're playing babies, just knock on the pretend door and say, hey, I just want to let you know in 5 more minutes, we're going to be having snack. Just calmly let them know that it's happening. So, and we would tell them too, and listen for the bell. When you hear the bell, it's time for us to clean up. This is when it was time, that teacher would go over to the bell ringer and say, it's time, it's cleanup time. They would get the bell and stand in one spot in the room and ring it, and they would sing, clean up time, clean up time. And so everyone knew it was time to clean up. And of course, the cleanup song would inevitably be sung. So this was the most popular job in our classroom. It was crazy. I mean, the kids loved it and couldn't wait to be the bell ringer. So that's one example. Visual cues, as we talked about earlier, are super helpful as well. You can have visual cues for those who need to see it so that they know what's going to happen throughout the day. You can consider making schedule cards like these over here on the right. And again, I have these available. If you don't have any or don't have the time to make them, you can purchase them in my store. I'll put the link below this at the end of this entire training. And we would put it either in a pocket chart, or we would just, with masking tape or painter's tape, just tape it to the wall. If it's going to be a year long that you're going to have it up, and which I recommend, get one of those pocket charts. It's really, really helpful. Okay, so now we're going to set up your schedule. Are you ready? You have your pen and paper, cup of coffee. I do have my coffee right here. The next 6 tips, or 5 tips, are all about this. First thing you're going to list out all of your non-negotiable times. What are those? These are the times of day that you cannot change. You do not have the ability to change. It might be lunchtime, right? That might have some flexibility. I worked in a program once where we had, it was huge. It went infants through 6th grade, a lot of children to feed, and we provided lunch. So um, our cook would deliver the lunches to our classrooms at very set specific times. It didn't mean we had to eat at that time, but we knew it was going to be coming. And if it's a hot lunch, we don't want to wait too long, right? Because then it's going to be cold. But that time, if it was delivered to our classroom at 11:45, then I knew in our classroom we need to be ready to sit down to eat by about 11:55. Give myself 10 minutes of wiggle room for cleaning up and washing hands. But it's kind of non-negotiable. Or if you have set outside times, when you have a lot of classrooms, there are only so many children that can be in the playground at the same time, and you also have state regulations that may not allow you to mix certain age groups. So it's not like you can go out with the children younger than your children or older than your children. So if your outside time is set in stone and it cannot be changed, put that on your schedule. Put all your non-negotiables on the schedule. If you have specialists in that program that I was just talking to you about, we had a set music time once a week and a set gym time once a week. That was non-negotiable. We had to be at the gym at that time. We had to be at the music room at that time. Those are non-negotiable. Put those in your schedule first. Now list your activities by name and desired length of time. Some examples might be circle time, 20 minutes. That might be how long you want it to be. I recommend a 10-minute circle time. I don't really think all the teaching happens necessarily at circle time. I know. Some of you do, and some of you have certain things you do at circle time every day. But if you need that extra wiggle time, I highly recommend cut out some of your circle time. Don't cut out your outside play. It's super important. Once your kids hit older grades, recess is going to be gone. They're not going to be able to run around anymore. Let's let them be children. Let's let them have their run around time every single day. They really, really need it. But I digress. You might have a story time at the end of the day. Maybe you'd like that to be about 15 minutes because maybe you're reading a story and the children are all, laying on the floor and talking about the story. Then write down that you'd like that to be 15 minutes. Center time, your interest center time, where you might even call that free play time. Let it be an hour. Give them plenty of time. If you can make it longer, even better. And next to each one of those activities that you want to do for the day, you also want to list what type of activity it is. Is it active? Is it something where they're going to be very active? Is it passive? Is it teacher facilitated? Is it child facilitated? So what do I mean by that? For example, your circle time, I won't go backwards. Circle time, that is typically teacher facilitated. Hopefully all the children are involved in it. They're not being spoken at, but being spoken with. But it's more passive. It's passive and it's teacher facilitated. So you don't want to then go to the next activity that's going to be passive and teacher facilitated. Kids are going to get bored. They need to move and they need to be involved. So that might be, for us, sometimes it was a science experiment. Sometimes it was very informal. We would just leave the materials out and the children could explore them. And sometimes we would lead them through doing a certain science activity with a small group. So that I would not want to go from circle time where it's teacher facilitated and somewhat passive. Circle time can be pretty active, but it's somewhat passive. I wouldn't want to take children from there right to a teacher facilitated science activity. That's too much passivity, and they're going to get bored and get burnt, pent up energy, and you're going to see some behavior problems. So what I might do is do circle time and then have them all choose the center they want to go to. That way they get that. We just open up the centers and the children go where they want to go. So if they're needing something more active where they want to build, they might go to the block center. They might go to dramatic play. If they want some more calm time, they may go to the water table. You get my point. So remember tip number 2 from earlier, which was you need to have a balance, okay? You don't want all passive teacher-led activities to happen back to back. That's what we just talked about. Next step, list your transitions. This is where we're going to list out. You know what your transitions are during the day. You know those in-between times. And this goes back to tip number 3, where you listed the transitions that happen in your classroom. And again, remember, they're going to happen whether you plan for them or not. So plan for them. Put them in your schedule. Plan the time that the children are going to need to clean up after centers, to wash their hands before snack, to put on their jackets to go outside. Build that into your outside time. If your outside time is 30 minutes, that's as long as you can be outside because that's your classroom's designated time outside, add 10 minutes to it. So children have time. So on your schedule, instead of it being from, say, 11 o'clock to 11:30, your outside time is going to be from 10:50 to 11:30 because that 10 minutes is going to be spent getting ready to go outside. Do you see what I mean? Okay, the next step, map it out. So now that you have all your activities in writing, you know which ones are non-negotiable. These are the times they need to happen. And the other activities that you want to have happening during the day, map it out into your time slots. You might want to have a circle time and a story time, as we talked about earlier. So you should have them both listed in the steps above that we just went over. So now, knowing that both of these activities are passive, you're going to want to break them up. So you don't want to have circle time and then have your children go to story time. Too much passivity. Perhaps you're going to have story time after snack, or maybe you'll have story time after you come in from outside. I find that to be a great time to do story time for most groups of children. It may be different for your group, but they've been outside, they're running around, and what happens is in the classroom, they're all hanging up their jackets. Some children are really quick, they get them off and hang them up, and now what do those children do? That's a transition while they wait for the other children to get their jackets off. That's when we would start our circle time. So the children who are still working on taking their jackets off, they can still hear the story, and it's helping them to transition as well. So that might be how you want to do that. So just consider that balance of active and passive. The final step, and we talked a little bit about this already, is observe, assess, and make changes throughout the year. So you might notice, because a schedule, we talked about this, is never set in stone. So if you see a behavior issue or behavior issues, plural, in your classroom, take note. See if you can find a pattern. Many times it's due to your schedule. And we talked about that earlier one where our kids were just wild crazy and could not sit still at circle time, even though this group of kids loved coming to circle time. They loved watching puppet shows and doing puppet shows, but they could not sit still because they hadn't been outside for weeks. It had been so cold. So you might notice that most of your children want to use the same 2 centers every single day, and they fight constantly about who's going to be in that center, because maybe it's one of those centers like we don't usually limit how many children can be in a center, but some of them we have to, just because of the materials available and the kids not like the sand table. We would have a limit of 4, sometimes 5, but we would tell them that that's how many children can be there. But maybe they're all hammering and fighting to get at that center. And then your other interest centers are avoided, right, or being neglected. So you might not have enough of a variety of interesting materials in the other centers. So you might want to look at that. You might have too much unguided time for the children during center time. This might be a good place to add a small group activity. It could be your children just aren't at that point yet where they can kind of self-regulate what they want to do and where they want to go. And we want them to have that freedom and choice, but they may just be super uncomfortable with it. So maybe have a small group time, maybe a science experiment or something throughout the day. You might notice that you've lost the interest of 3 or more of your kids during circle time. And if you've only lost the interest of 3 kids, hats off to you. That's really a great ratio. This could happen for many, many reasons. You may need to reduce the time at circle time. You might need to change the types of activities, or you might need to get rid of circle time altogether for a few months. Remember my story about the cold. But you can learn more about that in my circle time training. There is a training here in Preschool Cubby about circle time in preschool. I highly recommend that you take some time at some point to take that training. And there are links in there to articles I've written, which are the 6 do's and don'ts of circle time. You might notice that your children don't eat snack, right? So they're playing with their food. They toss a piece of cheese at each other. They say, look, here comes a spider. My cheese is a spider, especially if it's string cheese, right? So maybe your children have not had enough time during the day to interact freely. Most of your schedule prior to snack might have been teacher-led, or they might have been very passive activities, so now they've got a lot of energy. Just take a look at that and see what might be causing this behavior. It could just be your kids are being 3, or your kids are being 4, and they're playing with their food. It could also just be that they're bored, if you're seeing it happen a lot. Or it could be, if you have a lot of kids that are just not engaged, they may just not be hungry right now. I mean, have you ever had this happen where it's snack time? A lot of the kids, some of the kids aren't eating, and then a half an hour later, they're like, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. And you're saying, we just had snack and you chose not to eat. Well, they weren't hungry at that time. So, have the children mainly been involved in teacher-led and passive activities? Or, right, so look at your schedule at the time leading up to your snack time. Were they involved mostly in teacher-led passive activities, which meant they had to just do more listening and more focusing and not much more moving around? Has there been any type of gross motor or active play up until then, like music and movement? You may need to just adjust your morning so that they're a little more active, or you have that balance that we talked about. Another thing that may be happening is they're just not hungry because snack time is too early, right? So look at the times that most of your children come in. In a half-day program, maybe it's 9 o'clock. All your children come at 9 o'clock, and you're having snack at 10. Well, it is quite possible that your children just ate breakfast at 8:20, 8:30, right before they got to school, right? They're not hungry at 10 o'clock. Or if they're arguing a lot by 10:30, and they're having meltdowns around 10:30, and that's when you're like, oh my gosh, something happens in my classroom, there's something in the air, and they all just are having meltdowns, and 10:30 is your snack time, that might be too late. They might be too hungry. At that point, maybe you need to switch and, flip maybe your story time and your snack time, or move the time that you're going to have snack. So you just really need to look at the behaviors and see what leads up to it. Okay, let's review, because that was a lot of information. Number one, be sure to have a written schedule to post, even if that schedule is circle time, indoor time, outdoor time, snack time, as general or as detailed as you want it to be. But don't feel that you need to be chained to that schedule. You need to assess and change it as needed. Think about and try to reduce, if you can, the number of transitions throughout your day. If there are activities that you could do one right after the other, instead of doing one activity, transitioning to something else, and then going to this other activity, get rid of that transition and let those activities happen back to back. If that will save them and you some frustration of transitioning again. Decide on audio and visual cues for transition times. You've read many articles already from this training. There are many things you can do visually and for audio cues. See what will work with your children. Try some out and see if it works. And make sure you try it for about a week to see if it's effective. Plan around your non-negotiable times. So when you're planning your schedule, look at it, put in what is not negotiable, and then fill in your morning and your day around that. Add in the daily activities that you want to have once you've listed your non-negotiables, and then label the activities by type. Is it active or passive? Is it teacher-led or child-led? Let's go back to that one. So once you've labeled them, so you've added in the activities you want to have, and now you're listing active and passive, look at that. Do you have active, 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 passive, active, active? If that's the case, flip those around in your schedule so you have more of a balance. That might mean doing things at different times of day than you've done for the past few years. That's okay. Whatever is going to help your class be calmer with less chaos, it's totally worth it for the kids, and it's totally worth it for you. And then list the transitions that you've already determined are going to happen. We've talked about them several times. Washing hands, getting jackets on, taking jackets off. Make sure you're building time in for those transitions. And then map it out. Move your routines around to ensure that active-passive balance that we just talked about. And then observe it for a couple of weeks. See what's happening. We've talked about that too. If there are just this one time of the day seems to just get bottlenecked and everyone's cranky, look at what's leading up to that. What can you change? Is there a transition you can get rid of? Or do you need to add a little more time to a certain transition so it's a little calmer? It's going to take some time. Okay, this was a lot. This was a long module, I know. But again, there's a lot of information. You don't need to memorize it. All this information is on my main website. The link is below, so you can read the full article. And there's a preschool schedule packet. Go to your teacher resource section. It's a link above. It says teacher resources. Click on that. Scroll through that page. All of those are free downloads. They're free for you to download anytime you want them. One of them is about preschool schedules. Use that as your guide. And now take a break and relax. Go get a cup of tea, cup of coffee. And when you're ready, let's move on to Module 3. In Module 3, I want to talk to you about the skills that children, preschoolers learn and develop through transitions. They're not just times of chaos and transition. There is so much learning happening um, through these that just, it's amazing. So we're going to go through all the skills that children learn through transitions. So once you're ready, I'll see you in Module 3.